Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Corpstage interview with Simon Schillebex. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks for having me, Katarina. Very happy to be here.
Thank you as well. We're happy to talk to you today. We're also happy to hear more about your work, your impact that you're creating over the world that I was very impressed by, and also to hear a little bit more about a handprint. So would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work, please?
Sure. So my name is Simon Schillebex. I'm originally Belgian, but I've been living in Singapore for almost 8 years now, and I'm an academic entrepreneur. So on the one side, I work at a business school in Singapore, and I teach business model innovation and sustainability. And my research focuses on the intersection of sustainability and digitization. So specifically the use of various digital technologies like AI, machine learning, blockchain, IoT, in order to advance sustainable development. And then outside of my academic work, I have founded 2 organizations. One in 2018 called Global Mangrove Trust, which is a non-profit that specifically works in mangrove restoration. And another one called Handprint, which is a now kind of fast-growing social enterprise for profit that is making it easier and more valuable for companies to contribute to regeneration. And regeneration, in our understanding, really focuses on the creation of positive impact, both at the environmental as well as the social level.
Thank you. That's really impressive, using the academics to build a business, but business with impact, actually 2 businesses. Environment is very important. We're all trying to make sure that this is something that we keep healthy long enough. With Handprint, or maybe even with another company, the organization that you have established, what is the impact that you're creating in the sustainability field globally?
Right, so I'll focus on Handprint, right, because that's really the most, I think, the most interesting and entrepreneurial venture. So the impact that we're trying to create is on 2 fronts. So on the one side, we do a lot of thought leadership around the importance of regeneration. And so if we look at how most companies define their sustainability strategy, it can be mostly summarized in a very simple sentence: let's do less bad. So it's about reducing the footprint, water footprint, carbon footprint, maybe environmental footprint, but it's really about focusing on doing less bad. And increasingly, employees, customers, and even investors don't really think that that is good enough anymore. So more and more companies are asked or demanded to actually do good, do something meaningful, and create a positive impact. And so Handprint is the flip side of footprint. Footprint is the sum of all the negative impact an individual or a corporation has. Handprint is the sum of all the positive impact they create. And so what we do as an organization is we bring into our ecosystem the best non-profit organizations that are working in social and environmental regeneration. So they can be reforestation, coral reef reconstruction, ocean plastic cleanup, biodiversity conservation in the environmental front. And in the social front, it's work like providing access to potable water, providing meals, providing access to education, helping people escape slave-like conditions. So anything that really aligns with sustainable development. And so we bring these NGOs, most of them are NGOs, can be charities. We bring them into our ecosystem and we work with them to evolve how they are financed. Kind of move away from a donation paradigm where they try to get the public or companies to just give them money and then they'll do something good, which is interesting and it's great that this happens. But for most companies nowadays, especially as ESG reporting is becoming very important, this pure donation paradigm doesn't really work very well for companies because there is not enough auditability, there is not high quality reporting, there is not high frequency reporting. And if there is reporting, then it tends to be very heterogeneous, which means that if a large organization like a multinational supports many different NGOs all over the world, they spend months and months trying to collect data, and then they need to get these data audited before they can put them in their annual reports. So Handprint really solves all of those problems by streamlining the data reporting into a single platform, providing access to reporting tools to all of the organizations on the ground, so that all of the steps in the creation of an impact and then the long-term monitoring of the outcomes that are created, social and environmental, can be communicated in a very easy way. So that is really what Handprint is doing on the impact side. And then Handprint on the other side builds the infrastructure that enables companies to integrate this positive impact into their engagements with stakeholders. So specifically focusing on employee and customer engagement. That means that companies that work with us try to kind of rejig how their CSR budgets or even their marketing budgets work, and try to use these budgets in a way that aligns with a specific interaction that the company has with, let's say, a customer. So for instance, what that means is we've created a plugin that enables any kind of e-commerce organization to link its sales to the creation of a positive impact, so that they can tell their customer at the moment that the customer makes a decision, am I actually going to buy this product? So they can have this message that says, hey, if you're buying this product, we are going to restore coral, or we're going to provide 1 hour of education for free to people who are in need of education. And Handprint then serves as the technology layer that enables this, but also as the certifier that this impact really happens. And so far, at the environmental front, which is most of where we work now, we have, I think we reached this milestone last week. We've basically protected or expanded 1 million square meters of natural ecosystems through our ecosystem.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. And there's so many really highly valuable points that you mentioned now. And there's a couple of that I have follow-up question. One of them is the reporting. There's also another one, the activities that are happening currently. And so I want to come back to that as well. But as for the reporting, I agree with you. There's a lot of big corporations who are producing reports at the end of the year, but we're not able to track back the activities that were built up to that report. When you monitor that, what specifically are you looking at when you're working with a big corporation to make sure that they have the information collected, which they can use at the end of the year to produce the report?
Yeah, it's a good question. So actually, the way that we work on the reporting is less in a corporation-centric fashion and more in an impact partner-centric fashion. So because what we've realized when it comes to the creation of impact, and I'm using impact here in a very broad term, right? So covering both social and environmental benefits that we're trying to achieve, is that it is possible to map the processes that are necessary to go from origination, which is, let's say, when funds are received, towards execution, towards monitoring and care. Right. And so if we map these processes at the impact type, let's say reforestation as an impact type, coral reef reconstruction as an impact type, ocean plastic cleanup as an impact type. If we map out the processes, we can provide much more credibility in terms of what is actually happening on the field. So if you think about the typical way that most companies these days engage with nature-based solutions, it's through the form of buying carbon credits. This is very popular in a lot of large corporations that want to achieve some kind of carbon neutrality. And the way that this basically works is they buy carbon credits in the market, and that's it. They don't know much about anything, right? And this is then a very trusted type of environmental benefit, but there is no real pathway to engagement, and there's not a lot of involvement. The other extreme is, as I mentioned, like companies also in their CSR programs will give money directly to an NGO and say, hey, use this money to do some social good. And then the NGO at the end of the year will report to all of its different donors saying, with all of the money we received, these are the different things we've done. right? And so this has very limited accountability, and it's very much not personalized. So if you're a donor and you want to sponsor a specific project, it makes much more sense for you to actually say, here is some money and I want you to do this with that money. And right now, many NGOs don't like this because they want to have this freedom to basically reallocate funds wherever they see fit. But many corporates do like this because they say, this is where our purpose is an organization, and we don't want you to take money from us and then I don't know, deploy it in another country or deploy it for another type of social benefit that is less aligned with what our brand is aligned with. So we're kind of solving these problems. And then so the reporting that we put in place is really by breaking down the different steps in the impact creation process and enabling the organization on the ground to report on each and every step. And so that the corporate that is sponsoring this has a clear insight and say, okay, we want to, let's say we want to support reforestation and we're going to finance 100,000 trees. Great. But in the early conversations that we have with companies, it's very much like they're sending us the money. And then a week later, so can we see the pictures of the trees? And they're like, this is not how reforestation works, right? So there is an education component, say like, look, there is a process. If we're sending 100,000, you're going to finance 100,000 trees. Yes, there is a project that's ready, but that means seedlings need to be collected, nurseries need to be built, seedlings need to be planted originally in a nursery, they need to grow till they're big enough so that they can be inserted in the field. So all of these steps are currently completely opaque. And in the reforestation space, it's one thing, but in any other type of impact protection or impact conservation or impact creation, they're even more opaque. And so by mapping out these different steps and then enabling the NGO to provide very detailed reporting on each step as they are deploying the funds that they've received, we massively increase trust and the relatability of what is actually happening in the field. And then the NGOs also use our tools to provide images and videos of what's actually happening as the money is being deployed. And that is obviously a valuable asset that then the company gets access to and can share with its employees, its customers, saying like, okay, here, this is the money, we've given this budget, and look what's happening on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. They see progress and they have a new story to tell, they have a new touch point. And that's where a lot of the value comes from.
And this is a great information because we keep talking about how big corporations want to change something, but they're not changing the operations. They're not changing specifically anything within the organizations, but they are in a way funding somebody else to do good things and then report back, which in a way is a good step going forward. But we would all like them to learn about how can they integrate that system on a long-term basis, right?
Yeah, and I think there it's really, for me, it really comes down to what the organization and what the corporate is doing itself, right? So there is, if I look at this from my perspective, as someone who's been kind of studying this area and been working in this for quite a while now, I think that there is tunnel vision right now. There's carbon tunnel vision in how companies think about sustainability. And that means that there's a singular focus on carbon footprints and carbon footprint reduction. And carbon footprint reduction is extremely important. And that means that companies need to change their internal processes and to become more energy efficient, to change the way they produce, all of those kind of things in order to be less reliant on fossil fuels, less reliant on polluting materials, all of those things. Extremely important. But if you really think about it, these things are only important if you're a manufacturing company, if you're a transportation company, if you're producing energy, right? And in the mining industry. These are really the main sectors where this footprint approach is very important and where we need to advocate that companies change their internal processes. But there are so many sectors that don't fit those few groups, right? Every digital company like mine, like yours, every service-oriented company, every governmental organization, every non-governmental organization, law firms, consultancy, I mean, just name it. 75 to 80% of people in the developed world, so that includes Europe, Canada, the US, Singapore, Hong Kong, to a certain degree also Australia, don't work for companies that are in transportation or manufacturing. And or energy. And as a consequence, those companies and those people have nothing to do or very little to do with reducing our footprint, changing our internal processes in order to reduce our negative impact. And so what Handprint is really trying to achieve is to convince organizations that, look, the most important thing that you can do as an organization in terms of either fighting climate change or protecting biodiversity or creating social impact is not necessarily by kind of changing your internal processes. There are always small things you can do. You can buy green energy if it's available. You can reduce flying. You can reduce flying in business class. You can, in the company, serve more vegetarian food. I mean, there are steps you can take, but all of these steps are very small. Like the bigger impact that companies can have if you're not manufacturing, so if you're not making or moving things, is really not about internal change. It's about supporting external change and then making that valuable for the company.
And that actually means that each of them each industry maybe needs to take a look at the customized way in integrating sustainability and making sure how they're affecting the, protecting the biodiversity and the environment as well. Specifically looking, as you said, not everybody's working in the main heavy industries. And so what are those ones who are not? Currently, in your opinion, when you look into so many things that are happening around the world, what do you think, what are some of the most pressing sustainability challenges that the world needs to address in the immediate future?
I think from an environmental perspective, the two biggest challenges right now are biodiversity collapse and climate change. Climate change, of course, has already garnered a lot of attention, and rightfully so. But biodiversity is very important. I recently heard on a podcast, and I don't remember who it came from, but somebody that said, like, climate change is fundamentally challenging the way we organize the economy. Biodiversity collapse is fundamentally challenging whether or not our species survives. And and I think the woman on the podcast put it more elegantly than I did, but it's an interesting realization that this issue that is for many people very new is considered to be potentially a bigger existential threat, and it's a more complex issue to address as well. Now, there's been a lot of progress at the policy level, a lot of commitments, but as we always know, commitments don't always turn into real action. So for me, I think these are really the two biggest challenges. And for climate change, of course, the way we address that is through decarbonization and to innovation. I think these are really the main things. We need to innovate, especially how our heavily polluting industries like steel and iron and cement work. And then for biodiversity, the big thing really to do is we need to produce our food differently. We need to eat differently. And we need to impose, from a regulatory perspective, a global moratorium on deforestation. We need to do a much better job at conservation. And we need to reduce very significantly fishing, especially in vulnerable areas. And that requires a lot of international coordination, which is extremely challenging. And so I'm not necessarily super hopeful about the fact that we're going to achieve all of those things. But during COP15 last month in, where was it? I don't even remember anymore.
Egypt.
It was COP26 was in Egypt. COP15, I think, was in Canada. It was about biodiversity.
Oh, okay. You're thinking on 26.
Yeah. So the biodiversity summit, I think now 195 countries agreed that they're going to protect and turn into natural reserve 30% of their land and their oceans. And if we achieve this, we're now about 17%, then by 2030, so that's the 30 by 30 initiative. If we achieve this, that would be an incredible achievement in 8 years. So I'm hopeful, but cautious.
Couple of months ago in November, there was a web summit here in Lisbon, and I'm sure you heard about the web summit. It's one of the largest summits in the world, but happening here in Lisbon. And so they had 5 different spaces with companies showcasing what a lot of activities really. And one of the pavilions, there was a big board asking people what do they think, when can we reach out to the goals that UN has set up through the Agenda 2030. And so they put 2030, they put 2025, 2030, 2050, and never. Can you guess where all people put the dots? And I took a photo of that. One day we will look at it.
I mean, because you're asking me the question, I will say never.
Yes, that's what majority of people say, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, of course. And I think that the problem with that question, of course, is that it invites that kind of answer, because all of the UN sustainability goals, yeah, they're probably very hard to achieve if it's like we have to completely eradicate hunger and eradicate poverty. And I mean, it's all possible. It's practically feasible. We waste about 50% of the foods we grow on a yearly basis. So there is enough food on this planet to feed 8 or 10 billion people. That is not the issue. It's more a coordination and an organization issue. But those problems seem to be much more intractable. And yeah, but I have reasonable faith that we will weather the climate change storm, and that by 2050 we're not going to be at net zero, but that we are going to be in a much better place than we are now. Although by then the world temperature will be significantly above 1.5 degrees, and a lot of this is going to have a lot of negative consequences in terms of adverse weather effects and hunger and droughts. And so, but I think we'll be on a trajectory that leads to a more sustainable planet.
I agree with you completely. From scientific standpoint, how the earth heats, whatever we do, at one point when we stop with the heavy industries, and when we change, not stop, when we change the way how that functions, this is not going to happen overnight. It will keep increasing until one point, and then we'll see it stop and then probably be paused at that level. I don't think we will probably be here when that starts going back, because it will start years. And I know there was a lot of discussion about, is it possible in the next 30 years or 40 years actually to keep the temperature balanced and not keep it increasing? In some of the studies, some of the professors that I have been talking to said that maybe in 50 years, we will be able to come to some point if we rearrange the way how industries are functioning now, including the shipping industry, including one of the main industries, as you mentioned, is food industry. And just because in some parts of the world, there's a high production of the food that is impacting the climate change, and in another part of the globe, there are people who don't have what to eat. So people around the world talk about the balance. Here's the opportunity for us to balance this out and make sure that the food has been dispersed, in a balanced way.
I think there are lots of opportunities there. There's lots of complexities. I still think I'm a little bit more hopeful that we may actually reverse some of the damage we're doing still in our lifetime. I plan to get very old, so
okay. That's on the point where I said, yeah,
50 years. Yeah, I would still assume that I will see at some point a net reduction in the carbon concentration in the atmosphere before I die.
And, to achieve that, we really need to make sure that everybody understands what needs to be done on so many levels. So we're talking about, we have people who are in the operations. They need to understand the high level and high view of what the people in the board meetings are talking about, what the executives are talking about. So everybody needs to understand their part of the puzzle. What is my responsibility to make sure that I complete one part of the whole picture so that everything works perfectly. And so I know that you are working with a lot of clients to educate them first and let them know what they need to do. Where do you see the biggest challenges? And it doesn't have to be specifically one industry or the size of an organization or the size of the impact, because this is very specific and individual. But what is the biggest challenge that you see at this point?
I mean, there are so many. I think one big challenge is that in general, unless if there is very stringent regulation, companies are, as profit-seeking entities, are unlikely to commit sufficient funds to these environmental and social problems that we still have if they're not forced. And so unless if you have very strong regulation, that's unlikely to happen. And one of the reasons why it's unlikely to happen is also because companies still don't really see the value of doing this, or are very bad at capturing part of the value that they can create by doing good things, by creating positive impact. So in one of the experiments that we did with an e-commerce store in Australia, we showed that implementing our tools in their e-commerce practice, in their e-commerce store, actually increased their sales by 16%. And so for them, then planting trees for every checkout is not a cost anymore. This is a way to drive growth. And of course, you can then argue about whether growth is good or bad, and there's a lot of other contingencies. But I think increasingly there is a way, if you do it well, if you use the right tools and you use the right strategy, that actually doing well can become can be really tied with doing good. But for me, I think the biggest problem that I see as I engage with larger organizations is their inability to coordinate decision making at the right level. And especially for large organizations where you see like operations, marketing, CSR, sustainability, finance, all of these are departments that are pretty siloed. And so the head of marketing and the head of CSR and the head of operations, they don't have a conversation. They don't even know each other in big companies. And if you're trying to create systemic change, whether it's by doing something like Handprint is doing, that touches on lots of aspects, lots of different aspects of the organization, because we speak to the CSR people about budgets, about the marketing people, about integrating this positive impact into their campaigns, to the technology people about integrating it into the digital experiences. And there's a lot of different things that need to happen or that can happen. Then it very often becomes extremely difficult. So unless if you have very high level CEO or board of directors buy-in that say like, we're going to do this and we're going to make this part of our brand identity, our DNA, it's very hard because of the siloed nature of most of the departments within companies. And so for me, this is really the biggest challenge. And it translates almost perfectly to what we also see at the global stage when it comes to the fight against climate change and biodiversity laws, that the biggest problem is really about how do we coordinate among countries, among decision makers, and then of course, who's financing what? That's also a big problem. But many of the issues that we face are not really problems of knowledge or problems of technology or problems of willingness to act. It's really problems of coordination. They just don't know how to make decisions with these different groups of people that all have their own KPIs and their own incentives. And as a consequence, organizations find it very hard to kind of realign to a new purpose and then embed it into their practices.
Yeah, and this is a very serious thing when the departments don't communicate. How are you gonna create that overall? We're talking about the results, not just an impact. Once they're not connected, there's not communication about what needs to be done, and then tracking year by year how that has been leveraging and how the impact has been planned to make. So there's a lot of really challenges here. Well, what do you think when you're working with those organizations? What are some of the most effective strategies for driving that meaningful progress on sustainability, or maybe some tools that they could be using to make that progress much more effective?
So I think there are almost, like, as always, there are almost two approaches, right? So one is top down, where you, if you get in, like for an organization like us, I think many sustainability focused organizations, the higher in the organizational hierarchy that your conversation starts, the more you can get done. And a lot of that comes down to, if you have a champion that has sufficient power and authority in the organization, then that person can push things through, and they can organize a workshop, they can organize a learning experience, they can ask or even force all of the executives to come to a specific meeting where these plans are going to be discussed, and then hopefully you create a bit more champions. And so this is a top-down approach that can work. The alternative, and it also requires a champion, but it can happen at a lower level, is how do we get the employees, even the ones that don't necessarily have much decision-making power, how do we get individuals within an organization involved in ESG and in CSR, involved in impact creation? And volunteering is a powerful mechanism. I think that can help, mainly obviously can improve learning. There's a lot of benefits for companies, but it also helps companies identify who are potential leaders at different levels, which is very useful. And then secondly, what's an interesting approach is that you can democratize impact. And so this is something that we've been working on as well, where the relevance there is in terms of finding out what actually inspires your employees. Because you can have a CSR department that functions in a silo, that has typically a small budget. They typically don't have a seat at the board. And every year they're giving money away to people who come and ask in the community, whatever. And they're doing a variety of good things, but it's not strategic, and it's not necessarily like embedded in the organizational structure, and in employee loyalty. Right. So, but if you democratize this and you say, hey, we've got 20 projects that we identified as being potentially interesting for us, and you ask your employees to vote, or you ask them to allocate a budget to each project that the company pays, then you get more involvement, right? And a lot of the work that needs to happen when you're, as an organization, going through a transformation, whether it's a digital transformation or a sustainability transformation, is you need to get involvement, you need to get people excited, you need to get different levels of the organization feel connected with the causes that are being supported by the organization. And so democratizing impact, democratizing access to decision-making around what are we as a company going to do, I think is a very good way to start that process. And then you can make it more interactive by allowing employees to propose their own projects that they like. And so like that, you can kind of organically build a corporate purpose rather than having the CEO or consultant come in and say, we're going to do some interviews and define what the corporate purpose is, and then everyone needs to follow that. But so I think you can do this from the bottom up. It's going to take a bit longer, but probably it's going to have a much more longevity as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's in a way that mantra, if you engage me at the beginning, I'll be a champion. If you engage me at the end, I'll be a critic, right? So it's always good to, yeah, that's why collaboration and partnerships are making really a big impact. And so within the organization, if we look at it as a small stakeholder group, then yeah, everybody needs to be engaged to have that accountability for the actions that the organization is producing. Yeah. I know we have a lot of questions, and we can talk about so many things, and this is very important. Aside from being interesting for me as well, it is very important topic, and we're always curious to find out new ways how we can help leaders to make sure that they are engaging their teams and they are engaging their board members and all stakeholders is in a way. But I also know that I want to be respectful of your time as well. So I will ask you at the end, maybe, what message do you have? What message could you leave for our audience about the importance of sustainability, the sustainability leadership, and also the role that everyone can play in this important action going forward?
So I think at the individual level, I mean, everyone can make small changes that are going to, if everyone does it, going to have a very big impact. But I think there is a lot of blame shifting that is happening in the environmental space, especially. And it all began with the companies that came up with the concept of a carbon footprint and so, and it was really a way to make individuals responsible for the fact that activities that they were involved in. And so I think at the individual level, it's really about, yeah, kind of step by step adjusting some behaviors. And I think the most meaningful things to do are like, yeah, I mean, reduce your energy and water consumption. Is the way you do dishes. Do you really need to, and then like many people do you really need to make your toothbrush wet before you put it in your mouth? It's a very small thing. It has literally there's no point to it. I don't know why my parents taught me. Most people do this, and I just really don't understand this anymore. There's no point to this. I mean, the way you do your dishes, there's like all of these kind of small things that you can do in order to change, switching of the lights, buying energy efficient light bulbs, and all of those small things will add up. If you have the financial means, buy solar panels. It's going to save you money. Drive potentially an electric car, especially if you live in a country where you have reasonably clean energy. Even better, don't own a car. Reduce your meat consumption. I mean, all of these kind of small things can help. But what it really comes down to is that we need very radical change in the way we produce energy, the way we produce food, the way we produce industrial commodities. The last one is the hardest one, I think, although the food production is also very challenging. And these changes will need to be made. And at some point, that also means that these changes will need to be financed. And that can be through taxation, that could be through subsidies, and that could be through increasing your willingness to pay for products that are more sustainable, under the assumption that that sustainability is credible. And so governments have a role to play there to ensure sustainability. This is something I happen to know that, for instance, in Belgium, there's one of the political parties is working on this, mandatory disclosures and so around sustainability. And then companies, I think the most important thing for companies, again, and especially for all of the companies that are not in the business of making, moving, or mining things, it's to find the purpose, right? Find the right causes that really align with what you as an organization want to stand for. It's not intelligent for a company to try to do everything. We're just reading this report from KPMG on the G250 sustainability reporting. So the 250 biggest companies in the world and their sustainability reporting. And they said that I think it was over 50%, I only just read it, basically reported on all the sustainable development goals. And yeah, you can understand why they might want to do that, but I don't really understand how this necessarily makes sense. And they said that most of them report on 70% report on all of the SDGs, but in a way that really is not meaningful. So I think it makes a lot more sense to pick the causes that you're really passionate about, that you believe engage with your employees, that you believe inspire your customers. Obviously, you should test these beliefs, and then really do something meaningful in there. Because I think that is going to get an organization much further than just trying to do a little bit of everything in order to be perceived as legitimate by all different types of stakeholders. I think focus on, depending on your activities, focus on the damage you do and how you can reduce it, and then focus on the good you do and why you do good in that specific area, and then create a powerful narrative around it so that it becomes something that is identified with the brand, and then it becomes very hard for the brand to step away from that. So that would be my advice.
That's great. And one thing that I want to add is that keep collaborating and be connected. We can
absolutely
learn from exactly people who are doing this in the best possible way in that situation. And so looking at some of the best practices, if there's any, this is all new to a lot of companies. But there's ways some companies are doing great actually, because whatever they do really from inside out, making sure that it's a foundation for them. And there's a lot of examples where we can really learn from different organizations how they do it that in a right way. So maybe that's things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's good that you're reminding me. I mean, collaboration there is going to be very important, right? Not only between companies, not only between suppliers and buyers, but really across industries, across organizational types, collaboration between startups, incumbents, multinationals, governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations. There is a lot to be learned from each other. And I think if you do these collaborations well, there can be a lot of business value to be derived from that as well. The only thing that I would always caution against is lots of collaboration ends up being a lot of talk and no action. And so I would always favor a collaboration that sets itself very clear, actionable goals. And actionable for me is not like, oh, we'll organize another event and we'll come together again and talk more. Like, we've talked a lot. Like, there is a lot of talk in the world. There's a lot less doing. And so very often when for instance, when I'm asked to come to speak at an event, I will tell them, like, I will only come if you plant a tree per attendee or do something else. And if they say, no, but we want you to come talk about sustainability, then I say, well, if you don't even want to do anything, then I'm not interested in coming. So I think really this is, I think a mindset shift that is happening with lots of people, and that more and more, companies and any kind of actors in the space, in the event space, in the bringing people together space. I think there should be a real focus on how do we make this event something that actually has a quantifiable positive impact in the world? This would be, that would be useful.
Exactly, and that's amazing. The ESG Summit and the GRITS Award last year, it was in Singapore, and we planted 2 trees for each speaker and companies that were presented. And this year it will be in Bangkok, and I think we want to increase that as well. Increase the positive things that everybody who attends or is engaged in any way can be, produce something. So I completely agree with you. Actions speak louder than words. So we can agree on something, but that needs to be completed so that we can plan the next step going forward.
Well, let's do this together with Handprint. We can help you find the perfect partners and do all of these cool tech things to make it a really engaging experience for every attendee at the event.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Simon. It was a pleasure talking to you. Wish you all the best with Handprint, and we want to hear more as you grow and develop and learn more from different organizations to, come back soon and tell us about that as well.
It would be my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Katarina.
Of course, you're welcome. All the best.
Same for you. Bye, everyone. Have a good afternoon or good morning, whenever you're listening to this. Ciao.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We enjoyed talking to Simon, learning about Handprint, but also learning about what's currently happening around the world, making sure that we are collaborating and we're supporting from the startups, from small and medium companies up to big organizations, so we can communicate about the problems, possible solutions, innovations that we can use, and then really talk to the policymakers so they can change what would help us make a bigger impact. Stay with us, and we'll look forward to welcome you at the next interview. Thanks a lot. All the best, everyone.